they've had a pretty tough break, but not quite as bad as you.
They say Hollywood forgives everything, but John Wayne didn't. One insult, one bad performance, or one broken promise, and you were dead to him. These 5 stars crossed a line, and he never let them come back from. Starting off with Vera Ralston. On the set of The Fighting Kentuckian, John Wayne had one explosive rule: no one tanks a scene. But Vera Ralston couldn't hit her mark, and Duke snapped. It started with a simple line flub, then another and another. Each take spiraled into frustration. The crew exchanged glances. Wayne clenched his jaw. Ralston, cast as the French heroine opposite Wayne's rugged frontiersman, was struggling. Her lines came stiff, her timing was off, and her Czech accent clashed with the southern setting of the film. According to multiple sources on set, Wayne finally erupted, loud, public, unfiltered. "Why the hell is she even here?" he reportedly barked, loud enough for the whole soundstage to freeze. What followed wasn't just an actor losing patience. It was a full-scale breakdown of Wayne's trust in the studio system. But the real target wasn't Ralston. It was actually Yates. Wayne wasn't the only one wondering how Ralston had landed the role. She wasn't a proven star, nor did she have much box office draw. But she had one thing: a direct line to Herbert Yates, the powerful head of Republic Pictures. Yates wasn't just her boss. He was her patron, rumored lover, and later, her husband. Ralston had been cast in several of the studio's top productions, despite her limited acting ability, all reportedly pushed through by Yates himself. Wayne hated that kind of favoritism. He had worked his way up through B-movie grit, stunt injuries, and years of one-take westerns. When someone was handed a lead based on a personal relationship rather than merit, it wasn't just unprofessional. It was disrespectful to the craft. Wayne saw acting, for all its glamour, as a working man's job. You showed up prepared, knew your lines, and hit your cues. If you couldn't do that, you were wasting everyone's time. It wasn't just a one-time tantrum. Wayne reportedly refused to speak to Ralston off-camera after the first week of filming. Scenes between their characters became strained. In dailies, the tension bled into the performances. Directors whispered about reshoots. Production assistants were caught between two magnetic forces, one the face of the studio, the other its biggest star. According to Far Out magazine, Wayne even threatened to walk off the project unless something changed. The studio knew they couldn't afford to lose him. Wayne was Republic's cash cow, the man who had carried their brand on his shoulders for years. But Yates refused to replace Ralston. So they compromised. The director trimmed her dialogue, relied more on reaction shots, and tried to frame the romance in a way that minimized their lack of chemistry. Still, Wayne never forgot, or forgave. A career scarred by one role. After The Fighting Kentuckian, Wayne distanced himself from Republic. He began working more with bigger studios like Warner Brothers and Paramount, choosing projects where he had creative control and casting influence. He never shared the screen with Ralston again. When asked years later about the film, Wayne didn't mince words. "Some movies are harder to make than they ought to be," he said in a 1960 interview. "And sometimes the problem's standing right across from you." For Ralston, the blowback was quieter, but just as severe. Her star never fully rose. She continued acting under Yates's protection, but never broke into the mainstream. Critics often cited The Fighting Kentuckian as one of her weakest performances, and one of Wayne's coldest. What made this feud more than just an on-set squabble was what it represented. To Wayne, this wasn't about one actress missing her mark. It was about the integrity of an entire industry. Hollywood to him was slipping, letting politics, relationships, and vanity override hard work and real talent. Ralston became a symbol of everything he couldn't stand. Even decades later, film historians would point to this moment as the beginning of Wayne's increasing control over his productions. He formed his own production company, Batjac, not long after, and made sure no one, not even a studio head, could saddle him with a co-star he didn't believe in again. But Ralston wasn't the only actress who crossed the Duke's red line. Just a few years later, Wayne found himself facing another co-star who set him off, only this time it hit even closer to home. She took the role he promised to someone in his own family and paid the price for it. Kim Darby. Kim became the co-star who took what Wayne had promised his own daughter. John Wayne was livid the moment he heard Kim Darby's name. It wasn't just that she was an unknown. It wasn't her age, her style, or even her inexperience. It was that he had already made a promise. The role of Maddie Ross in True Grit, the sharp, headstrong girl who forces U.S. Marshal Rooster Cogburn to hunt down her father's killer, was supposed to go to someone close to him, his daughter, Aissa Wayne. Wayne had talked it through with the producers. He believed Aissa could handle it, and more than that, he wanted her to do it. He was fiercely protective of his family and saw True Grit as a chance to pass the torch, to give his daughter a foothold in the business the right way. But then the studio pulled a fast one. They cast Kim Darby behind his back. According to crew members, Wayne kept things civil in front of Darby, but the tension was impossible to miss. He kept his distance between takes. He avoided eye contact, and when they did speak, it was short and clipped. Duke felt betrayed, one associate later said, not just by the studio, but by the whole setup. He thought it was going to be a legacy moment, and they handed it to a stranger. And that stranger didn't act like someone grateful to be there. Darby was 21, awkward around the crew, and in Wayne's eyes, too modern, too removed from the grit and strength he thought the role demanded. She approached the part with quiet sensitivity and subtle defiance, something that grated on Wayne's nerves from day one. Far Out magazine later reported that Wayne believed Darby was completely wrong for the role, even if he never said it to her face. Wayne felt outnumbered and outdated. This wasn't the same John Wayne who bulldozed casting decisions at Republic Pictures. This was 1969. New Hollywood was rising. Directors and producers no longer deferred to the biggest star in the room. Even on True Grit, the film that would earn him his first Oscar, Wayne was losing ground behind the scenes. He didn't just disagree with the casting, he saw it as a symptom of something bigger. His old-school worldview was colliding with a studio system that now cared more about youth appeal and realism than loyalty or hierarchy. Wayne had been promised control, and then Kim Darby walked in with a studio blessing and a performance style that felt to him like open rebellion. She was disrespectful to everyone, Wayne allegedly said later. Whether that was true or not, it reveals something deeper. He couldn't connect with her, and worse, he couldn't control the project the way he once could. The icy relationship. Ironically, the tension helped the film. Their characters were supposed to clash, a grizzled, one-eyed gunslinger forced to work with a stubborn teenage girl. And in every scene, that discomfort felt real. But off-camera, it never warmed. Wayne reportedly warned younger actors to never work with someone you wouldn't share a beer with. And he had no intention of ever working with Darby again. After the film wrapped, they never spoke. He never mentioned her publicly, except in dismissive comments. The role that brought him his long-overdue Academy Award also left a bitter taste. According to Far Out magazine, the bitterness wasn't just about Darby's performance, it was about the opportunity stolen from Aissa. He never got over that, one family friend claimed. He thought the business had changed, and not for the better. Kim Darby never fired back publicly. She never revealed much about the experience, perhaps knowing full well how powerful Wayne's word was in Hollywood. But silence doesn't mean she didn't notice. In interviews years later, she dodged questions about Wayne with short, vague answers. Some interpreted it as reverence, others as avoidance. And maybe she understood exactly what had happened, that she'd walked into a role promised to someone else, and that John Wayne, for all his on-screen toughness, held grudges the way other people held family heirlooms. Kim Darby got under Wayne's skin by showing up in a role he'd earmarked for blood. But the next actor never had to step on the same set to ignite Duke's fury. He didn't need to. One snub, broadcast live to millions, was enough to set off one of the most ideological feuds of Wayne's entire career. Marlon Brando. The moment Sachin Littlefeather walked onto the stage, John Wayne reportedly had to be held back. It was the 1973 Academy Awards, and Marlon Brando had just refused his Best Actor Oscar for The Godfather. Instead of accepting the award, he sent Littlefeather, dressed in full Apache regalia, to deliver a speech about the mistreatment of Native Americans in film and television. The room fell into stunned silence. Backstage, Wayne exploded. According to multiple accounts, including Far Out magazine, it took 6 security guards to restrain Wayne. He had been seated backstage, ready to present an award. But when Brando's rejection unfolded, Wayne reportedly lunged forward, furious at what he saw as a public insult to the entire Hollywood system and to the Western genre he had spent his life defending. Wayne wasn't just angry, he took it personally. To Wayne, this wasn't just grandstanding, it was sacrilege. He had built his career on cowboy myths, rugged masculinity, and patriotic storytelling. Brando's Oscar stunt felt like a direct attack on that legacy, especially the part where the speech singled out Westerns as being particularly harmful to Native representation. In other words, it called him out without ever saying his name. That was the final spark. But the fire had been burning for years. Brando and Wayne had never worked together. They didn't have to. They stood on opposite sides of an invisible fault line that ran through the heart of Hollywood. Wayne was the flag-waving, straight-shooting emblem of old Hollywood, a man who stood tall, followed the rules, and believed in heroes. Brando was the moody, method-acting symbol of New Hollywood, unpredictable, brooding, and allergic to tradition. Wayne didn't trust actors who didn't hit their marks. Brando didn't trust actors who didn't feel their lines. Privately, Wayne considered Brando's acting pretentious and his politics dangerous. Brando, for his part, once called Wayne's films fantasies for men afraid of real emotion. They never traded barbs in the tabloids. They didn't need to. Their names alone were shorthand for a much deeper war, tradition versus rebellion. What made Brando's refusal of the Oscar so unbearable to Wayne wasn't just the content, it was the stage. The Academy Awards were supposed to be sacred ground, recognition, respect. By sending a protest in his place, Brando had turned the night into a statement, and Wayne was incensed that the entire room didn't walk out in protest. He didn't hide his fury. In interviews afterward, Wayne called the incident disgusting and a cheap shot. He doubled down on his belief that Westerns had honored Native Americans more than harmed them, a claim many critics saw as tone-deaf even then. But for Wayne, it was never just about accuracy. It was about honor. And Brando, in his eyes, had none. There's another layer to this feud that went beyond politics. Years earlier, Brando had been considered for the lead in Viva Zapata, a politically charged role based on the life of Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata. The part was controversial, radical, and a clear shift away from the roles Wayne favored. But it was offered to Brando, and he won an Oscar nomination for it. Wayne hated the film, not just because of its politics, but because he believed the role glorified rebellion for the sake of rebellion. He once told a friend that movies like that are the reason people don't know who the good guys are anymore. To him, Brando wasn't just a political actor. He was a corrosive influence on American storytelling. The most haunting thing about their feud is that they never confronted each other directly. There were no face-to-face arguments, no showdowns on set, just a smoldering resentment that played out in interviews, in public statements, and in the cultural divide they embodied. Wayne dismissed Brando as a coward who hid behind causes. Brando, when asked about Wayne, would shake his head and say nothing. And that silence made it worse. Brando never needed to be in the same room to drive Wayne to the edge. But the next feud started with a letter and turned into a full-on war between two icons of the Western frontier. Clint Eastwood. When John Wayne read the script for High Plains Drifter, he didn't just put it down, he picked up a pen. He had just watched Clint Eastwood's ghostly gunslinger ride into town, paint the buildings red, and orchestrate a violent revenge that turned the Western genre inside out. To Wayne, it wasn't just disturbing, it was blasphemy. He wrote Eastwood a private letter, and he did not hold back. As reported by Collider, Wayne condemned the film as un-Western, criticizing its dark tone, its cynicism, and what he saw as a complete betrayal of what the frontier was supposed to represent. The message was clear. Eastwood may have borrowed the cowboy hat, but he didn't earn the right to wear it. The irony? Clint Eastwood had grown up watching Wayne. He admired him, respected his presence, and even patterned some of his early roles on that iconic stoicism. But Eastwood didn't copy the Duke. He subverted him. His characters didn't fight for clear-cut justice or God and country values. They were quiet, ruthless, morally ambiguous. Sometimes they helped people. Sometimes they just survived. And in the early 1970s, audiences couldn't get enough of it. Wayne, however, could barely stomach it. He believed Westerns were about honor, that even in the chaos of the frontier, there was always a line between right and wrong. Eastwood erased that line, and High Plains Drifter was the final straw, a surreal, vengeful nightmare where the hero was barely distinguishable from the villains. Wayne saw it as a betrayal of everything he'd fought to build, and unlike his silence with Brando, this time he spoke up. Wayne's letter wasn't public at first, but word of it spread, and Eastwood didn't deny it. In later interviews, he acknowledged that Wayne had taken offense to High Plains Drifter and that the letter had criticized the film as being not how Westerns should be made. Eastwood, in typical fashion, never fired back. He didn't need to. The box office was doing the talking. His anti-heroes were dominating screens, while Wayne's brand of upright masculinity was beginning to fade into nostalgia. But that silence was its own kind of power, and it stung. This feud wasn't about a single movie. It was about two visions of America. Wayne's America was built on hard men doing the right thing, sometimes with violence, but always with purpose. His characters were flawed, but they had a code. They stood up to tyranny, protected the weak, and believed in the red, white, and blue. Eastwood's America was different. It was tired, dirty, morally gray. His cowboys didn't talk about values. They just acted. They didn't lead towns. They haunted them. And more often than not, they walked away from the fire without saying a word. To Wayne, that wasn't evolution. It was erosion. There's one moment that could have changed everything, but didn't. In the early 1970s, Eastwood was developing a script called The Hostiles, a post-Civil War Western with room for two leads, one older, one younger. According to some accounts, Eastwood wanted Wayne to star opposite him. It would have been historic, the grizzled old cowboy sharing the screen with the next generation, a final symbolic handshake between eras. But Wayne refused. The reasons were never confirmed, but insiders speculated that it wasn't just the script. It was pride. Wayne had spent decades defining the Western, and he wasn't about to co-star in a version of it that he didn't believe in, especially not next to the man whose films, in his words, spit on the cowboy legacy. The film never got made. Unlike many of Wayne's other feuds, there was no blowout with Eastwood, no public insult, no dramatic confrontation. Just a growing silence between two towering men, one looking back, one moving forward. Wayne kept making movies, but the momentum had shifted. Eastwood kept experimenting, taking the genre to darker, stranger places. And by the end of the 1970s, it was clear who the new king of the Western was. But even decades later, Wayne's shadow loomed large. In 1992, when Eastwood directed Unforgiven, many saw it as a direct response to Wayne's legacy, a meditation on violence, regret, and the myth of heroism. It won Best Picture. Wayne had died 13 years earlier. Frank Sinatra. It happened in a flash. One Las Vegas night, a cocktail party turned cold, a stare became a sneer, and before anyone could stop it, John Wayne had thrown a punch, not at Frank Sinatra himself, but at his bodyguard. According to Las Vegas Advisor and other retellings, the blow came after weeks of tension and years of quiet disdain. Wayne had never liked Sinatra's crew, the drinking, the late nights, the smug Rat Pack attitude. But that night, something snapped. The insult that triggered it, still disputed. Some say the bodyguard made a snide remark about Wayne's politics. Others say it was just the look on his face. But whatever it was, Wayne struck first. It wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Frank Sinatra was the face of post-war cool, Italian suits, smooth talk, civil rights advocacy, and sharp-tongued politics. Wayne was none of that. He wore dusty boots, clenched jaws, American flags, and unshakable traditionalism. They weren't just on opposite sides of the political spectrum. They were opposites in how they moved through the world. Sinatra endorsed liberal candidates, marched with Martin Luther King Jr., and welcomed controversy. Wayne gave interviews defending the Vietnam War, railing against what he saw as moral decay, and famously told Playboy that he believed in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility. Statements like that didn't just offend Sinatra, they made him furious. Wayne, for his part, saw Sinatra as arrogant and self-indulgent, a man who used charm and celebrity to mask what Wayne believed was a lack of integrity. To Wayne, being an American wasn't a performance. It was a duty. And anyone who mocked that, even through a smirk, didn't deserve respect. Behind the public personas, there was real animosity. Years earlier, the two men had shared a soundstage, briefly so, and the rumors from that shoot painted a picture of two alphas circling each other, both too proud to blink. When Sinatra would show up late or joke with the crew, Wayne would leave the room. When Wayne launched into patriotic rants between takes, Sinatra rolled his eyes. But the deepest cut came in private. According to several biographers, Wayne once told a producer that he would never share the screen with that punk again. And he meant it. No collaborations, no reconciliations, just cold distance. To Wayne, Sinatra's entire brand, from his politics to his parties, represented the decline of old Hollywood values. The Rat Pack didn't stand for anything but style, he believed. They joked through press tours, slept through rehearsals, and partied through the 1960s while the country, in Wayne's eyes, was coming apart at the seams. It wasn't that Wayne was humorless, it was that he didn't think America was a joke, especially not the West, especially not the military, especially not the men who fought and died for the values Wayne had spent his whole career dramatizing on screen. So when Sinatra cracked wise about cowboys and their toy guns at a private dinner, Wayne didn't laugh. And when that bodyguard raised an eyebrow one night in Vegas, Wayne raised his fist. Sinatra never apologized, and neither did Wayne. They were too proud for that. After the Vegas incident, neither man commented publicly, but friends close to Sinatra said he never forgot the punch or the message behind it. And Wayne? He considered it a moment of principle. He wasn't embarrassed, he was satisfied. What made this feud so unforgettable wasn't the violence, it was what the fight stood for. It was old America versus new, stoicism versus swagger, silence versus showmanship. Neither man would ever admit the other had won. But by the time Wayne died in 1979, Sinatra had already started dialing back his public profile. The cowboy outlasted the crooner, in film, in image, in ironclad legacy. They built something else, a legend of a man who didn't just act tough, but lived by a brutal code. He didn't always say the right thing. He wasn't always fair, but he never backed down. And sometimes the people who hated him most helped carve that legacy deeper. These are the faces John Wayne couldn't stand, from silent grudges to explosive showdowns. But every feud told you something about the man behind the legend. So now it's your turn. Which rivalry shocked you most? Which side would you take? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.